You've probably made mistakes too, haven't you? They are committed by everyone, but not everyone can admit it. Has it ever happened that you do terrible things but you don't understand that this is happening in real life? It is as if there is another reality in parallel, and you are the main character in it. My name is Ron. I am 30 years old, married, and have two beautiful daughters. My family and I often move from city to city. We have to change houses, sometimes even first and last names, to buy some time and live in peace. And all because of me, or rather, my reputation. My past has caused a lot of problems. Later, the circumstances were beyond my strength to fight them, so I was forced to just run. My psychologist, Dr. Sens, says that if I can overcome my inner fears and look them in the eye, everything will be fine. I don't really trust him, to be honest, but I have to attend his sessions. It all started when I was 5 years old. My parents and my sister Dill came to live in California. Dad bought us a small but cozy house. The family's favorite pastime was playing board games by the fire, which were more entertaining in bad weather. It was particularly cold that night, and there was a snowstorm. Meanwhile, we were playing Monopoly. Suddenly, the lights went out in the house. My father found a flashlight on his phone and went to the basement to find out what the problem was with the electricity. My mother volunteered to help him and told us to sit still and not go anywhere. At some point, I opened my eyes and saw a group of medics around me. They held an oxygen mask to my face, wrapped me in a blanket, and told me not to worry, that everything would be fine, but it won't be good. I know it now. But then I only wanted to go to my mother. Out of the corner of my eye, the noise and the flashing lights of the police car, I saw 3 stretchers being carried out of the house. I'd seen them in movies, and I knew there were people there. I knew that the black bag covers the dead. In my subconscious, I already knew who was lying on that terrible stretcher. After a funeral for my family, I was sent to be raised in an orphanage. I stayed there for a short time, and then was adopted. I got into a family of teachers. It turned out that a mature couple could not have children, and they liked me. My mysterious story about how I suddenly lost my family caused pity in others. The local police officer sometimes visited me and told me that he remembered me and that he would find the killer. In the meantime, I needed to move on, try to open myself up to a new family. I tried. My new parents loved me, and I honestly loved them. We had a great 2 years together, had a little travel, Thanksgiving, Christmas. It seemed that fortune pitied me and gave me a chance to be happy. I think like that, and boom, déjà vu. Me again, single again. For some reason, I was standing on the porch of the house barefoot in my pajamas. I felt a familiar burning sensation deep in my chest, as if a fire was starting, and I gasped and fell to the ground. A policeman that I already knew ran up to me, gave me a big hug, and picked me up, then handed me over to the medics. It was like a blur, as if I was regaining consciousness and already saw the ambulance, the police, and again, the black bags that covered the lifeless bodies on the stretcher. "Don't worry, baby, everything will be fine," said the representative of the law. This false phrase haunted me. I was returned to the orphanage. It was said that someone in the house forgot to turn off the gas and my foster parents just fell asleep. Fortunately, at this time, I was in the yard, sitting on the porch playing. Then the neighbors called the ambulance because I was lying on the ground unconscious. So one family replaced another. Surprisingly, I was often adopted. Perhaps it's all about my appearance. Everyone said I was a very nice kid. So after losing another family, I returned to the shelter again, and the new director decided that I definitely needed psychological help to cope with my injuries. He said he understood what it was like to lose loved ones, even if they weren't blood relatives. He sent me to my first psychologist, Dr. Sens. At first, we just talked about me, and after a few sessions, Sens began to bring the conversation back to my childhood, to the night when, for the first time in my life, I started having blackouts. Sens considered the deaths of my foster families not an accident, but an algorithm. That's what he thought, though he didn't say it out loud. I honestly told you everything I remember. However, my doctor's expression was ambiguous. "Come back next week," he would say, and so it went on for some time. I've lost count. Time passed. I grew up under the phrase, "Nice to meet you, my name is Doctor." One doctor succeeded another, and I had a family in parallel, but the more I searched my head, the more nightmares I had. Everyone was the same. 5-year-old me playing Monopoly with my parents by the fireplace, then going to the kitchen to get juice for Dill. Then all of a sudden, I'm standing in the middle of the living room with a knife in my hand, blood everywhere, and my sister's lifeless body. Then I'm 7. My foster parents and I were going to lunch. My mother asked me to help her set the table, and I stood by the gas stove for a long time. Then I said I wasn't hungry and went outside to play. I didn't know then that it wasn't a dream at all. After a few mysterious deaths, the police noticed a certain pattern. Wherever I was, people were dying around me, and violent deaths. At first, I wasn't a suspect because I was a child, but it turned out that responsibility before the law doesn't look at age, nor does the fact that I was found to have amnesia. I was completely unaware of my actions. I did not even remember how I killed people, killed my relatives. I was charged and sent to a juvenile facility. Every time I washed my hands, I tried to wash away all the blood that would remain on my palms forever. The only visitor I had in the colony was Dr. Sense. He kept telling me that someone else had to be in my place, the real killer. I didn't know how he could be so sure. Sense, a specialist, gave evidence to the police in my support, but his only vote against the algorithm of the police was powerless. The law enforcement officers felt that the psychologist was not objective because of his attachment to me over the years. Mr. Sense promised to prove my innocence, but it required my brain, my painful memories. I didn't want to touch them. I was afraid to reawaken the hidden evil in myself and cause pain to others. But Sense insisted, and I trusted him, so I agreed. The psychologist got permission to perform certain procedures in the presence of warders. I was taken to a room, tied to a chair, put on my head something like a helmet from which wires were sticking out everywhere. A lie detector was also working, and a video was being recorded. Sense put me to sleep using hypnosis. He used to do the same thing, but the sessions were interrupted. I fainted, then woke up. There was no guarantee that the procedure wouldn't fail again, but Doc liked to take risks. I stared at one point for a long time and fell asleep. I went back to that cold evening. My family and I were playing Monopoly, and Dill asked me to get her some juice. Then the lights went out, and my parents went down to the basement to see what was going on. A few minutes later, we heard a noise. My little sister was scared, so I held her close. My mother came up to us. "Mom, is everything okay? Why are you holding a knife, and where is Dad? It's like she's mad. This person was approaching us, and when the light from the fire in the fireplace illuminated her, we saw that all her clothes were bloodied, and her eyes were empty and cruel." Dill screamed. I tried to protect her, hide her in another room, but she caught up with us when we tried to escape. She grabbed her daughter, and I fainted. By this time, Mr. Wilson had knocked on our door and called the police when he heard the screams. Mom opened it for him. Her face was the last thing he saw. The 3 bodies that were taken out of the house, the third was Mr. Wilson, not my mother. "Now I'll snap my fingers and you'll wake up," the doctor said. Bang! And my heart was pounding in my temples. I didn't know what was going on. Around me sat the staff, a couple of doctors, and Dr. Sense. Many years have passed since then. My mother was reported missing, then found and arrested. She still won't say why she hates me so much that she's killed everyone who's nice to me. "We will still meet at the same stop," she told me in court. Annoying journalists spy at me, my neighbors and relatives. For a long time, they all wrote something down in notebooks, took hundreds of pictures, tried to interview each victim. They all did a story about what happened in my village in 2017. A Boeing 747 took the lives of 39 people. The youngest was only 4 months old. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! That's how loud and fun we met the next New Year with our family. My mother, as always, prepared a lot of delicious food, and my father properly heated the house to keep it warm. It was one of those rare evenings when my parents allowed me and my 2 little sisters to stay up until midnight, eat sweets, and quickly open gifts hidden under the tree from Santa Claus. My mother always kissed us on both cheeks and told us how much she loved us. My father showed love to the girls, and he treated me like a man to a man. He always wanted to raise me with dignity, without snot. He believed that I would grow up to be a strong and confident man, because I was the long-awaited first child for them. A few years later, 2 girls were born into our family, my sisters. We were an ordinary family. My father worked, my mother was a housewife. I went to school, studied in the 6th grade, and my sisters were still young. We had big plans for the coming year. My father wanted to finish the house, build a barn, and buy pet animals. Our village was also little different from the others, although its location was not far from the airport runway. The area was noisy every time the locals heard the hum of a plane gaining altitude, but we were used to it. In the early morning of January 16th, 2017, my mother woke me up. It was time to get ready for school. I rubbed my eyes and envied my younger sisters. They were so sweetly sleeping in a warm bed, and the snow-covered road to school was waiting for me. At some point, I wanted to say that I had a fake flu to get some more sleep, but my mother had already poured me hot tea for breakfast and was calling for a snack. After the meal, I kissed her, put on my jacket and hat, and ran to school. There were a lot of lessons that day, but I was ready in all subjects. I can't say that I was a perfect student, but that day I got an A in all subjects, even in literature. My mood immediately lifted. I just wanted to show the diary to my parents as soon as possible. I already imagined coming home and showing my grades to my mom and dad. My father was on vacation and was at home. I knew my dad would encourage me with a new toy, so on the way home, I thought about which one to order. Just around the corner was my street, but from a distance I could see huge beds of smoke stretching up, people running everywhere, shouting something. I stopped for a few seconds. My heart began to pound in my chest. I wish they were all right, I said out loud. Then I don't remember how I got to the right street to my house. This wasn't my street. It looked like a garbage dump with a pile of wood on fire. It turned out that it was not firewood at all, but houses. They were all familiar to me, and yet they were unrecognizable. Some of them had no foundation left. It took me a moment to realize what huge pieces of iron had been crushed and rammed into our street. A Boeing 747 crashed right into our village. Imagine people died because of a plane crash, because of a cargo plane that was carrying some things. Who would have thought the safest transport would ever land on our heads? The Dacha settlement became the definition of a national tragedy. All the media, including the world, were full of news about what had happened. With shaking hands, I heaved my briefcase to the ground and ran back to the house. Hot tears ran down my cold cheeks, and I gulped the cold air with my mouth, feeling as if I were suffocating. Somewhere in my heart, I already knew that I had no one to brag about today's grades. And now I'm standing in front of the gate. Only they remained intact. There was a fire burning all around, and a strong smell of burning filled my nostrils. Shock. For the first time in my life, I felt a violent terror, one that chills to the bone. At every house, people were crying. Someone fainted. Someone just screamed that there is strength. My gasping breath was not from the smoke, but from fear. The wreckage of the plane was cooling, like the blood of the dead. The iron bird was torn apart. The nose of the plane stuck in someone's house. The landing gear demolished the house next door. It turned out that at this moment, the man managed to grab his daughter and dodge. They managed to escape by a miracle, but his wife and other children were killed. In a matter of seconds, people died. They left whole families. Under the collapsed houses, somewhere a mother covers the children with her body, but it did not help. My family was also caught in the rubble of the house. I lost everyone in an instant and couldn't believe it. One by one, people came to our village. Among them were those who lived there. They only survived because they were at work. Among others, there were also journalists, employees of various services, and doctors. Somewhere else, there was a glimmer of hope that there were more survivors. But while one family was being saved, another was dying. I remember how in the yard our neighbor had stockpiled body parts. And everywhere there were screams, tears, and hysteria. How long did I stand there in a stupor? I don't know. I came to myself in the hospital. There were journalists too. They looked at me, asked something from the doctors, and cried. Then I realized that this nightmare was not a dream. This incident became a national tragedy. 73 houses were destroyed. Adults and children were killed, including 4 pilots. Sometime later, it turned out that the accident was due to a technical fault. It happens like this. You live your life and you don't even know that something like this can touch you. 3 years have passed since then, but the wound is still fresh. I will always remember the last time I had tea with my mother. Appreciate your family and friends. Show love to them every day. You don't know what might happen tomorrow.